Begin, shall we?
Let me increase the font size. So, assignment 1 then. Let's introduce it. The technologies relevant to assignment 1 are HTML and CSS only. No JavaScript is required for this assignment. So this assignment is covering everything we've done in the course so far, but not including the stuff we're doing this week. So, the objective here, you're going to create website layouts using HTML and CSS, structure website content using HTML elements, apply CSS to style website content, and use responsive design techniques to optimize websites for mobile devices, which is everything we talked about, right? Requirements. Create a website to provide information about a medical condition. You can choose whichever medical condition you wish to document. That's the creative part. The website should have a title that appears in the tab of the browser. It should have at least 3 paragraphs of text. You can copy these from any other information as an external source, but provide links to any sources used at the bottom of the website. So you are not required to do any creative writing for this assessment. I think my camera is tilted. That's just going to be annoying. Okay, let me fix that, sorry. There. I think that's better. Sorry. We had like a projector problem, you know. So, you know, if you want to take your informational text from, you know, whichever website, Wikipedia, or, I don't know, you guys, like, do they tell you guys that, like, WebMD is a reliable source, or is that just for normies? Is it? Okay. Somehow I would think that would be the sort of thing that they would talk to you about, is like what websites are reliable. You know? But I suppose that changes, doesn't it? Anyway, just cite your source, please. APA style. It doesn't say that here, but APA style. 3 levels of subheadings should be used. Use an ID and CSS to style one of the headings. 3 images must be present. One must be centered, one must be right aligned, and another left aligned. Padding should be used. 2 different types of ordered lists should occur. ID, ordering 1, 2, 3, or ABC, or an order with Roman numerals, etc. Present a table of data with at least 3 rows and at least 3 columns. Use either row span or col span to have a row or column span to have at least one cell span multiple rows or columns. We didn't cover that in class, but if you look that up on W3 Schools or some other additional source, you should find good examples on how to do that. The table should have headings. Neatly style the table using some way, border, margin, padding. Also, if it looks nice, it's better. So remember that stuff we did with Bootstrap to make tables look nice? Not a bad idea here, or anywhere else, to be honest. Incorporate one of the following into your website. A CSS grid to present content. For example, presenting the images. CSS flexbox to define page layout. That is to say, a main content section and a sidebar, something like that. we covered the bootstrap way of doing this. So for this, I'm happy for you to use the bootstrap grid system instead of Flexbox. It's a little bit more dynamic and a little bit more modern and up to date. Yeah, I might add that in just right now. Now it's official. Use the span element, a class name, and CSS in the expected way to give a specific word, your choice, a unique color, and underline multiple times your website. Use CSS to make style changes to the following. A particular style, the particular changes are up to you. Paragraph font size, headings, add padding, wording, and margin to images, and neatly style the table of data by using some combination of border, padding, and margin. Some of these requirements are beginning to repeat themselves. Use responsive design to make at least 3 sensible changes to the website when the width of the browser is less than 640 pixels. If you use the Bootstrap container system correctly, you get that one for free. It'll just do it by itself. It'll put in the standard ones. Does that make sense? Website should appear neat and professional. Effort should be made to style the website beyond these specific requirements in order to make it look unique. Question?
Yeah, that's the CSS should contain an dependency as well.
Yes. Yeah. Oh wow. And I'm going to. It says do not use Bootstrap, and I'm saying use Bootstrap. There we go. Actually, just to put a fine point on it. So, submission. Basically, zip it up, send it via the usual means, and that's it. For this one, we're not worrying about you getting getting it up on my canvas. All right, or my canvas. We're not worried about you getting it up on CS Unix. We will save CS Unix uploads for when that needs to happen. Does that make sense? Good.
And when is this due? When does it say?
Yep. So these are supposed to be bi-weekly assignments, so to me it would make sense that you would have 2 weeks to complete this assignment. I can make the due date sooner if you prefer.
Can we practice a little bit in class too?
Sorry, we got to move on to JavaScript. Yeah, unfortunately, we have so many topics to cover, I absolutely can't give extra time to work on stuff complex. But here's a breakdown of the marks and what they're all for. You can read that at your leisure. I will set the due date now. So let's make it Sunday, February 4th. an example of flexbox? No, I'm sorry, I do have to move on to JavaScript. I covered one of those three options in class. If you'd like to use a different one, there will be lots of good examples on W3 schools, but I don't have time to cover it in class, unfortunately. We must be moving on. So, JavaScript. The nice, squishy, comfortable part of the course is now officially over, and we are back to doing programming code in the proper sense. So, I hope we enjoyed our hiatus. We are back to if statements, we are back to loops, we are back to objects and object references. Though the stuff we're going to cover in this course will not get to the extremes of abstract object-oriented programming as the last course did. But you will need to know what an object is and how to access the properties of an object. It's kind of funny, in JavaScript, you use objects a lot, but you don't really ever create a class. Most of the classes that you're working with are predefined in HTML, right? And the objects that you work with are actually created by the HTML code itself. We'll see how this works. So, along with HTML and CSS, JavaScript is a core technology for the World Wide Web. JavaScript is necessary in order to add dynamic content to web pages. Basically, the most dynamic things get with CSS, you can apply custom styling rules for certain things like mouse hovers and mouse clicks, but that's all you can do, really. You can't really dynamically load information from a server, for example. It's not possible in CSS. You need a proper programming language available to you. That language must be JavaScript. There is no other client-side programming language. This is not the case once we get to servers. Once we get to servers, you can actually use any programming language so long as it has certain utilities available. But in the browser, on the internet, you are required to use JavaScript, which is hilarious because it's a famously bad language. It's bad because it's very loose with its conventions, and it does a lot of things which are inconsistent, and it very much has the feel of an ad hoc language, although it has been making improvement in recent years. So, technically speaking, JavaScript is an implementation by browsers of the ECMA script language. This is why you see newer iterations of JavaScript discussed as ES6 or ECMAScript version 6. The The first iterations appeared in Netscape Navigator 2.0 in the tender year of 1995. It's not particularly related to Java. It was more named JavaScript for marketing reasons. Java was new and fancy at the time. And you will probably notice this. C# is a language that strongly resembles Java. A lot of people call C#, well, some people call C# Microsoft's Java, right? It's actually kind of interesting. C# is really not it's not really a successor language to C++. It's another one of these things where they kind of just stole the name. C++ doesn't need a successor language because they just keep adding stuff to it to make it better over time. It's never really needed a successor. C definitely needed a successor, but C++ didn't. So C# is not really, C# is very Java-like in many respects. JavaScript is much closer to the family of languages, including Python. We never actually studied Python here, but these are interpreted dynamically typed languages. So you remember with C#, we had a compiler, we had a compilation process, right? In order to run our Windows forms, we had to go through a process of compilation, and an actual executable was produced in the end. If we cared to dig through and export things properly, those Windows forms do not have to operate inside of Visual Studio, right? You can take it as a standalone application and just run it, right? This is not the case for interpreted languages, and JavaScript is an interpreted language. Interpreted languages must operate inside of an interpreter, right? Now, the interpreter is a piece of software. It's different from a compiler because it is basically compiling it one line at a time and executing it as it's compiling it. With a compiler, you take your whole program, create executable code from it all at once, and have it so that it can run on the operating system bare bones, bareback, no pieces of software sort of intermediary, right? With JavaScript, it runs in a browser. Part of the browser is the JavaScript interpreter. So, when JavaScript is run, it is executed, it is loaded as it's executed, and it's loaded and executed one line at a time. This allows it to perform a lot of dynamic checking that's not possible in a compiled language. One of the things this allows is the so-called dynamic typing. You may be used to always having to type everything and being very careful about your type conversions in C#. My personal feeling is that that's good training for programming, because the correct way to program in a dynamically typed language is as if you're in a statically typed language. Always be aware of what the data types are, because a large category of errors that you come up with in JavaScript are hidden type errors. They don't present as type errors explicitly, but they will muck up your program, in various subtle ways that are difficult to diagnose because JavaScript as a language doesn't produce a lot of errors in general. It's a language that tries to take what you give it and run it, rather than requiring more of you as the programmer. I believe I saw a statistic that 70% of all of the code that's written on the planet is written in JavaScript. So, what is the intent of JavaScript? What can we do? JavaScript adds dynamic interactivity to websites. It can accept input from users, output data to the user. It can handle events like clicks, hovers, and changes to data, kind of similar to how we were handling events with our Windows forms. It can make requests to the for data to its server. The scheme that we are going to be using is AJAX. Although I forget what AJAX stands for, but it's asynchronous something, something, something. I'm not sure. I'd have to look up. What does AJAX stand for? There we go. Asynchronous, JavaScript, and XML. So there you go. So, you remember, hopefully, our client-server model, right? Let's talk briefly about the client-server model, how things work. So, you have your client, right? You have your server. Lots of information is contained on the server, right? The server might also be talking to a database, right? For example, take social media, right? You know when you're scrolling and it's as if you can like just scroll forever on like a Twitter feed or something, or sorry, X, the platform formerly known as Twitter. Obviously, the website hasn't loaded the entirety of Twitter's database to your local machine, right? What it's doing is it maintains, you know, some section of the feed. When the cursor gets low enough, it then performs a dynamic request to the server, loads the next chunk of the feed, right? The way that it's doing this is through either AJAX or another technology that does the same thing. So, the client has its initial request. Request index.html. Index.html is then sent by the server, right? Most of the time, what the server is doing is it's sending files back and forth, right? The client then decodes the index page. For example, perhaps it sees there's a CSS file required. It then requests any required CSS files, which are then provided. Right? Turns turns out that you can externalize JavaScript in the same way as CSS. But let's not worry about that for now. If you've got your web page, and the client requires more information from the server after all of the files have been loaded, that takes the form of an AJAX request. The AJAX request, let's just say it requires something from the server, right? The server, or it requires something from the database. The server talks to the database, gets information from the database, packages that up, and sends that back as a response packet. That information is then incorporated into the website. But the thing that does the incorporating is JavaScript. So, if you think of each website as having a JavaScript backend, AJAX requests and responses are handled through the JavaScript, which then puts values into the website, or puts information into the website. Does this kind of make sense? Sort of. Hopefully it will make more sense the more we see of it. But that's not something you can do with HTML and CSS. Not by themselves. I wonder where Phil is. Did he say he was about to come?
No, he didn't say anything.
I hope he's not stuck in traffic or something.
I'll send him a text message. Did he email you or anything?
Oh, I try not to check my email on these things. It's okay. We're recording. You can catch up. So, JavaScript is interpreted by the browser. The browser receives JavaScript as uncompiled plain text, as it does with both HTML and CSS. The browser then interprets, i.e., it compiles and executes each line of JavaScript. So, in the same way that it just receives an HTML file, or it just receives a CSS file, the browser just receives a JavaScript file. It does not get the executable machine code. It's responsible for producing the executable machine code itself. And there are good reasons for this. Lots and lots of different devices have browsers. Lots of different devices with different CPU architectures. The set of instructions that are going to be required by the client, by the client's CPU, there's no way on earth that the server would know which instructions to provide. That's ridiculous. So instead it just sends out the source code. Yes. Interpreted languages have a reputation for being slower than compiled languages. Yes, I don't care what Kevin says, that's true. About 20 years ago, this was much more true. It's part of why JavaScript was initially unsuitable as a back-end language. Modern engines, such as Google V8, are much faster, allowing for better front-end JavaScript and even back-end JavaScript. Things have improved, but you're still never going to be a compiled language. Sorry, Kevin. So JavaScript is not only used in the client, JavaScript can also be used on the server. There is a variety of JavaScript called Node.js, which you can put on your server so that you have harmony between your client and server languages. They're both speaking the same language. While this is, it's convenient if you like JavaScript, but when we're on the server, we have more options available to us, and we will be exercising a different option in this course. That being said, on these kinds of lists of languages and things you should know for tech people, Node.js often appears quite highly on them. So I would recommend it if you're looking for a summer project. Picking up Node.js is a very employable sort of thing to do. So, JavaScript is a multi-paradigm language. So it can't decide what it wants to be. It is an imperative language, or it can be used like an imperative language, same as Python. So it has statements and variables, loops and if statements and functions, and that's all you need to be able to program in JavaScript to a certain level. In other words, it can behave very much like the C programming language. It has object-oriented capabilities. You can write objects and classes like in C# and Java. Although we're going to be a little bit light on that kind of stuff here. We will probably be using JavaScript mostly in this first sense. And then we also have functional, which is a paradigm that you probably have not heard about unless I mentioned it at some point. Functional languages consider functions as first-class members of the language. So examples are Lisp and Haskell. I happen to know quite a bit about the Haskell programming language. I did it for I wrote my thesis work in Haskell. So functional languages are based on the mathematical paradigm called lambda calculus. I won't bore you with this too much. Lambda calculus. In lambda calculus, everything is a function. Even numbers like 1, 2, and 3, and values like true and false are functions in lambda calculus. They are merely functions that accept no arguments. So everything is considered a function in functional languages. Even when you provide arguments to a function, you get another function as the result of that function. Basically, functional languages boil down to only two operations: argument extraction using lambdas and argument application. But that's too much high math. I just have to mention it because I personally have a great deal of fondness and affection for functional languages. JavaScript is dynamically typed. Variables can hold values of any type. You don't have to specify the type of your variables. Rather than declaring variable x as integer and assigning 5, we declare x as a variable using the var keyword. So we don't use bool, int, double, nothing. Just var for everything.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is and it isn't.
Yeah.
Because now you don't know what x is, right? JavaScript is weakly typed. So it uses implicit type conversion to make operations work as best they can. So an operation like 5 plus the string 5, this is an obvious error in C#, but in JavaScript, this is 10. Let me give you a demonstration. So, anytime you want to try out some JavaScript, if you go to your inspector pane in your browser, you can bring out, on the console tab, a JavaScript console. This is executing JavaScript over the page currently loaded in your browser. Now, do not mistake, none of this gets sent to the server, none of this affects any other users. You're basically just playing with the JavaScript that you were sent, right? But it's useful for trying things out. So, for example, 2 plus 2 is 22. 2 plus 2, also 22. Basically, if there's a string involved, it believes it's concatenating, right? So, true plus false gets you true false. It's implicitly doing concatenation, right? What's fun though is when you get to equality operators. So 2 is equal to the string 2.
That's true.
That's true. 0 is equal to the empty string. Zero is also equal to the character 0 inside of a string. But the empty string is not equal to 0. This is why I hate JavaScript. And this is why a lot of people who are math nerds like me also hate JavaScript. In mathematics, we have a very important property called the law of transitivity. All right? The law of transitivity states this. If A is equal to B, and B is equal to C, that should imply that A is equal to C. But that's not true in JavaScript. Right? So, and actually that's technically the logical operator. So, if I give the impression that I'm subtly annoyed by JavaScript at all possible times, this is my complaint. Right there, this is my complaint. Yeah, so. But aside from that, most of the normal mathematical operations that you would perform work the way that you would expect them to.
So, Dr. Guru, what is the reason behind this? Like, why it is false and in other cases it's true? Like, why?
So,
what is the reason why it says it's not true?
this the issue is this one, right? It's taking an empty string to be, like it's interpreting it as something resembling an undefined value. Or so here's another thing about JavaScript is you've got an undefined. undefined is a literal in the same way that true and false are. It's not a Boolean though. So undefined is equal to a couple of things. Anyway, it can be brought. I forget the exact black magic that you need to get it out. But yeah, basically, it thinks that an empty string is equal to 0 because I think it's also equal false. Yes, empty string is also equivalent to false. False is actually represented as 0 a lot of the time. In C, the underlying implementation behind false is that it's stored as the integer 0. So this to some extent makes sense, but making, that's where it's coming from, right? But, what it's doing is a bunch of implicit type conversions that you don't necessarily know what's going on. The best way to program in JavaScript is to avoid this kind of stuff entirely, right? And think about things in terms of strictly rigid types. And think of, if you think in terms of rigid types and you're always explicit about your conversions, you can't get into trouble with this kind of stuff. Which you can see how you would get in trouble with this kind of stuff, right? It becomes particularly bad in PHP. PHP uses a similar system. And PHP has a null value, and it has a false value. And in JavaScript, null is not equal to false. Null is equal to undefined, even though they represent different things. In PHP, false will test to be the same as null, but certain operations will return either of those in different failure states. So you need actually to be able to distinguish between false and null. So the question is, how do we do that? These dynamic languages provide a second type of equality comparison. The so-called triple equals. So the double equals that you've been using so far in programming and works the way you expect it to in C# doesn't work the way you expect it to in JavaScript. It's a looser comparison. But if you want the strict comparison version, which compares both type and value, you have an operator for it. That operator is triple equals, unfortunately. It's clunky. Nobody likes it. But in general, if you're having problems with these types of type conversions, using triple equals can save your bacon. Unfortunately, JavaScript isn't really good at telling you when you have a type problem of this nature. So, but if any of you know some children and they want to prove to their elementary school teacher that 1 plus 1 is 11, there you go, 1 plus 1 is 11. So, I'd like to take a moment and just demonstrate to you some of the things that JavaScript is capable of, now that I've whined about the language, right? So you don't have to follow this example or like be able to do this, but pay attention because this is kind of cool. All right. So let's say, just for the sake of interest, I go to YouTube and I grab a link to the Rick Astley video, Never Going to Give You Up, which, if you're familiar with meme culture, redirecting someone to this video is a common internet prank. Let's see how many views it has. Over 1 billion views, most of them accidental. So let's just go to some Wikipedia page, eh? About a toad. Fantastic. Let's grab this article about a toad. What a cute little fella. So, all of these links are HTML elements A. We can grab a reference to all of them using document.querySelector all, and then use a CSS selector to specify the HTML elements we want to grab. A. So now we have a list of all of our links on the page in JavaScript. Good. Now, for var I equals 0, I is less than links.length. I plus plus links at I dot href is equal to our YouTube link. Oh, did I make a syntax error? I don't think so. Okay. Now, if I've done everything correctly, let's say I'm interested in ethanol. First of all, if you hover over the link, you can see where it's leading. So the Wikipedia entry on ethanol is a rickroll. In fact, in one command, I have changed every link on this page to a rickroll. And that wasn't that hard. That was just a couple of lines of code. So, if you're ever in a situation where you want to fool your friends and befuddle your enemies, all you have to do is open up your console, grab a Rick Astley link, and you can create the greatest rickroll of all time. Now, here's the thing though, right? And this is important to understanding how JavaScript works. All of those times, I was opening the link in a new tab. What if I were just to click on the word, why is it described? Species description, oh, fine, okay. If I were to actually click on this, including a page reload on the same tab, right? If I go back, if I return to the same page, having reloaded it, right? You notice all the purple has gone away? it's back to its normal configuration, right? So any changes made by JavaScript are destroyed when the page is reloaded.
So how can we save it?
You save it on the server, right? The server issues the JavaScript to be run. Modifying things in console, like that's the reason it's not a serious thing, and it's appropriate for like playing pranks on people, right? Because it's not permanent. You're not making permanent changes to the website. Not even like on your own device is that a permanent change, right? But this is also the case with JavaScript in general. Anytime the page is reloaded, all of the JavaScript is completely blown away and reloaded from scratch. So, any values that you're keeping in variables in your JavaScript are destroyed. For example, maybe you have a button and the JavaScript is counting how many times the button is clicked, right? Pardon me. If you reload the page, all of those changes are destroyed. Like the counter is reset. Everything is reset when the page is reset. Does that make sense? Yeah, that's an important point to get though.
Just to interrupt, Phil
Certainly.
answered me that he's not feeling well, he has a fever, so he's
Oh. Tell him get well soon.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Sorry you're not feeling well. Get well soon. So, the large wrinkled frog. Okay, so it's a frog, not a toad. All right. So, does that make sense? Reloading reloads the JavaScript. I technically also just rickrolled everybody who watches this video on YouTube, so there you go. So let us now talk about how one goes about including JavaScript in an actual web page, aside from just playing with it in the console. Very similarly to CSS, we have 3 different mechanisms, but the inline version it doesn't work the same way that CSS does. You can't just define fully JavaScript here, or at least that would be an extremely terrible plan, even worse than doing it with CSS. Normally, when you're doing inline JavaScript, all you're doing is referencing a function that you've defined somewhere else, such as here. So button elements have an on-click attribute. If you give that a reference to a JavaScript function, it will execute that JavaScript function when the button is clicked. It would need to be defined either in a script element or in a external script.
So technically my function will be used as a variable to reference the function that you created in external script or something like that. Or
You've got the right idea, but the appropriate terminology is function reference. It's a function reference. This is kind of the way that you should think about functions in JavaScript. The name of the function is a reference to the function. So you can use functions without calling them. This is where the functional aspect comes in. You can, for example, pass a function as an argument to another function without having to call that function first. But that's kind of getting into more advanced stuff that we don't necessarily even need to know, so let's not worry about it too much until we actually have a use case. So, whereas with CSS we had a style tag where we could just dump CSS code, with JavaScript we have a script tag where we could just dump JavaScript code. Like CSS, we have the ability to include an external JavaScript source. It's not href in this case, it is source, same as with image files. Typically, you don't then include any actual script inside of that element, you just close the tag and you're done with it. Does that make sense? So, shall we work up an example? Okay. I'll ask if you wouldn't mind opening up your VS Code. We will do some in-class examples. Currently 2024. Yeah. You're having the New Year aphasia. Yeah. So I am going to create a new folder in Documents. 2301. Four. Yeah. That does not exist. Yes, I want to make it. There we go. So, making a web page always starts with making the HTML page. Let me just bit better? Yeah. So, all things are loaded from the HTML page. The HTML thing is the thing that's initially requested during all of this. Right? So, that's generally where you start with your programming as well. Let's make a new HTML page, index.html. There we go. Throw our boilerplate in. There we go. JavaScript examples. Good. Now, let's make an external JavaScript page. The object of this is really just to do some output messages to console, do some hello worlds, that type of thing. Let's do that for now. Script source is equal to hello world.js. remember our quick and easy way to create a file. If you right click or control click on that, then create a file. There you have it. Hello world.js. Now, of course, we now come to JavaScript has basically two ways of doing this. There is printing a message for a developer using the console, and there is printing a message for the end user. This is an alert box. Let's see how to use both. Yes?
Can you go back into the index HTML? I just want to see something.
Certainly.
Link and script tag, but why is it used?
Oh.
Link and script.
Sure. So, link is a more general sort of thing. So, with link, you then have to specify the relation, like what is the thing I'm linking, right? So, relation is style sheet. This specifies that the link is linking to CSS, right? You then, href and source basically mean the same thing. I don't think you have to end a colon. No, you don't. So link does CSS, script is just for JavaScript. Link will do a lot of other different things as well, but we use it just for CSS. But script is always, always, always just JavaScript.
Okay. So script is for writing a Java code basically. So that's
Yeah.
and
JavaScript.
Script, yeah.
Yeah.
And the CSS is just like styling the
Yeah.
website.
Just styling the elements, yeah. When you modify elements in the web page using JavaScript, styling rules will automatically be applied to them without you having to do anything, right? We'll see how this works.
So I have a question.
Mhm.
So for example, if I am creating a website that has a JavaScript as well as like the style CSS, so I will create one script and one style sheet basically, right? Or I can have it in one
Oh, they have to be different files.
different file.
They must be different files, yeah. Let's even create this. There we go. Yeah, so you can see they have different symbols. They have different file extensions, right? Yeah, the CSS file is like, yeah. There is a separation of concerns between CSS and JavaScript. JavaScript is not like, you can do styling from JavaScript, but it's preferred if you don't, right? You can make modifications to HTML using JavaScript that's the equivalent to using inline style tags, but you're basically just setting inline style tags from JavaScript, right? So, the preferred way of going about it, let CSS do that job, let CSS do its job, and JavaScript can do its own job, because they're not good at doing each other's jobs, right? So that's why you need both, and they both do very different things. JavaScript is very much a general purpose programming language. So, let's do 3 forms of hello world. Form number 1, printing to console. order to print to console in JavaScript, you must first type console dot log and provide the string you wish to log. Yes, it does. It is quite similar to yeah, debug.log or console.log. Yes. So console is a reference to the console object. Console object has a few different properties, as you can see in the autocomplete. You can clear the console. You know, you can count how many things in it are in it. Put an error instead of a log. All this kind of stuff. Put a timestamp in there, which is kind of useful. You remember how in in Unity, like just doing timestamps was like a huge pain in the butt? Here you can just log a timestamp. In fact, let's do that. Right. Now, let's find our files. Open our index page. There we go. You can see nothing has happened, but if we take a look at the console, hello world. Oh, you might have to log the timestamp. Timestamp doesn't want to work for me, so that's fine. We'll just stick to hello world. So, quick question. Did any of you know that the console existed before you started taking this class?
I can't see.
Oh, you can't see it? Problem? Oh, you might need to save your index page. Try reloading. There you go. So,
Hello world, print
oh, you opened the JavaScript
Oh.
instead of the index page. Now, open the console. There you go. Did you get it? Awesome. So, this is not meant for the end user, right? 1 in 10,000 people know that this thing exists. 9,999 people out of 10,000 have no idea that that you can even open this, and they wouldn't know what they were looking at even if they did, accidentally, right? Like the number of times someone has accidentally clicked the inspector pane instead of intending to, right? Probably many, many more people have clicked it accidentally than intentionally over the course of the internet, right? This is not meant for the end user. This is meant for developers, you and whoever your team is, right? Make sense? The other fun thing you can do with this, you can actually call up what the values of variables are while the website is running. So, for example, if I declare a var x is equal to 5, and I reload the page, if I ask for the value of the variable x, it gives me 5. So this can be used to interrogate what the values of your variables are. It's also a handy little tool that you can use to type in a line of JavaScript code see that you got it right and that it's returning what you wanted it to return before you put it in your JavaScript file. You can test your code out here, which is really what the intention is. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So this is, the console is an essential developer tool. This is how you debug, right? You probably remember me saying test early, test often. This is how. So, here we go. So, that is number one, the console. The alert box, very simple to use. Alert, and then you provide your message. Let's see what that looks like when it executes. There you go. This page says, hello world. Now,
Oh, that's great.
caution must be exercised. While alert boxes are useful for stopping the user and making them read something before they do anything else, because like the rest of the web page is not interactive until you click OK for an alert box.
Anything that is like, for example, rules and something you want them to accept it, so you can put it in an alert box.
Well, if you'll notice, most of the websites that want you to agree to like the use of cookies or something like that, they don't use alert boxes. Alert boxes are most of the time like used to tell the user that they have errors. Like you rarely see them, right? One of the ways I see them sometimes is if you're filling out a form and you have required fields missing or something like that. You sometimes see them pop up in alert box saying you must, fill out all the required fields. That type of thing. Overuse of alert boxes is bad design. The web page itself should be the thing that the user is interacting with, right? You shouldn't stop the user, right? Because it's very jarring to get an alert box. You shouldn't stop the user and just, halt everything for them to read this thing. This is particularly the case.
If something's time sensitive and they're like, they have to do some like test or something, then alert box can pop up when there is only 5 minutes left or something like that. So for that purpose, we can use an alert box, right?
Yeah, I mean, you'll find your own ways to use them.
We take it busy in Canvas.
Yeah.
So that,
Oh.
it tells the time that.
Yeah, like they built the time remaining into the interface itself, not requiring a pop-up. Yeah.
Yeah, but this is a good idea. Yeah, it's a good thing to know.
Yes.
It works.
It's another thing that you can use to fool your friends and shock your enemies. For example, I'm watching you fiddle. Right? People don't realize that you can just do that, especially if you close the console. It's like, the website's watching me. The internet is alive. The internet isn't alive. It's not watching. Well, I mean, I would be lying if I said the internet wasn't watching you, but it's not alive. People are watching you using the internet. That's how it works. But anyway, that's alert boxes. Overuse is bad, particularly when I show you how to set interval, how to use set interval. Let me just, here we go. Set interval, on. Can I remember how to do this? So basically, I just did a thing, which is going to require me to reload the page. I set it so that one alert box pops up every second. So, and alert boxes stack, so you literally have to click through all of them, and it's impossible. So,
You cannot do anything, it's just.
yeah. You have to reload the page at that point. So yeah, it's possible to overuse them and like completely destroy the goodwill of your viewership. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, as with anything in life, moderation. Moderation. So now, hello world number 3. Hello world number 3 is how to actually embed something in the web page itself, which is our preferred way of doing everything in a way that it's visible by the end user. Hello 3. Modifying the web. So, this is the more complicated one of the 3. It requires some work in the HTML file. In order to have something appear in the web page, you need something for it to appear in. So, let's make a paragraph. Not putting anything in the paragraph just yet. Going into JavaScript. We need to grab a reference to that paragraph cell. Same way that I changed all of the links on the Wikipedia page. Document dot query selector. And then you use a CSS query to grab the element. So you can grab classes this way, you can grab individual elements this way, and you can grab IDs this way. Most of the time you're going to be using IDs. There's another method that you will probably see because it's in there and like people will still be using it quite a bit. Document dot get element by ID. This is falling out of favor and query selector is like gaining popularity. This is considered the old and less good way of doing things right now. But trust me, you will see plenty of websites still using it. Right? So, query selector, paragraph. We can then save that to a variable. Save the reference to a variable. Var p is equal to document.querySelector p. Now, This P is a different P. That's a JavaScript variable named P. Perhaps I will call it something else just for disambiguation. Yeah. Now, we have lots and lots and lots of JavaScript, or lots of object properties available to us through that object reference. Let's try it in the console. Aaron, why are you talking about these things? Oh. Okay. So this is, I've accidentally stubbed my toe on another stupid JavaScript thing. Let me explain it, even though this won't probably make a lot of sense because it's too early. But I will explain it anyway.
Oh, no.
So, this is a law of how the browser works. It always loads HTML pages one line at a time. So, actually I think I do want to do this here. Now that I think about it. So, in our HTML page, we have put our script element in the header, right? So, the order of things that the browser loads. The first is the doctype tag. Second, HTML language equals English. Second, it's like, okay, this is a head. Here we go. Third, metadata, then it adds the title. Then it loads the JavaScript. The JavaScript is executed immediately. So that script, helloworld.js, is executed before the paragraph in the body has been loaded. That's why, if I take a look at my paragraph variable as created during that JavaScript script, it has it's a null value. It didn't find the element in the page because the page didn't actually contain anything. So, in contrast, this console is executing after the whole page has been loaded. If we perform the exact same piece of code in the console, it will work. Para is equal to documents dot query selector P. There you go. Para is no longer an empty reference. There are ways of getting around this that we will eventually study once we start looking at event systems, but for the time being, because this is basic JavaScript introduction, just pop the script to the end. So now we are loading the body and then we are executing the JavaScript. So the body will exist and the paragraph will exist once we, so that we can now grab a reference to it.
So is it a good idea to load the script after, or it's, usually we would do it before, right?
So basically, you want all of this stuff to be in the head. That's desired. What we are going to learn how to do is set up an event that triggers once the page is fully loaded, and then we will actually run our JavaScript. This is not so much a problem when all you're defining is functions, right? But if you have autonomously running code that's grabbing references, then the things need to be there to grab, basically. Various ways around this, but it's useful to have run, to have stubbed one's toe on this at this point in the lesson, because that's actually a very important point for understanding how this whole bloody thing works. So, anyway, so we have paragraph, right? All HTML tags, or all HTML objects, have a property called inner HTML. Inner HTML is the content of the tag. So you see, this paragraph tag has 2 spaces in it. This string has 2 spaces in it. This can be assigned to. There you go. We can overwrite the contents of HTML tags by grabbing references to them in JavaScript and then modifying their properties. Does this make sense? Sort of? You can do other things with this as well, not just modify inner HTML. You can, for example, and notice how it highlights on the screen the element that you're modifying. You do have access to things like style. Right? You can modify, that's basically, I've just added a inline CSS style attribute to this thing to turn the color red. That's all I did. But for the sake of completeness, let's finish our JavaScript here. Para.inner HTML equal to hello world. So there you go. Those are our 3 hello worlds. Has everybody got those working? Good. Did you get it working? Perfect. Good. And just for fun, and to reinforce the point, document.query selector all. Query selector all returns an array of all of the elements matching the tag. All paragraphs. For I is 0, I is less than t dot length, t plus plus, t dot inner HTML is equal to get well suit fill. it in. I didn't actually index it. There we go. That's not working for some reason. My cool example isn't working. How's that? Yeah. So it goes. Anyway, so let's talk a little bit about variables now that we've talked about hello worlds. So basically, there are three ways of going about it. One is using the var keyword, another is using the let keyword, and the other is to use no keyword at all. So let declares a variable within the scope of the block it is declared inside of a function. So, for example, inside of a function, so this is the way that you declare a local variable. If no term is provided, JavaScript will check within the current scope, and the scope's above the current scope until it can't find X. If it can't find X, it hits the global scope, and X becomes a global variable. So variables are kind of global by default, which is terrifying, actually, if you know anything about global variables. So if you expect JavaScript to behave the way that C# behaves, you basically need to preface most or all of your variables with let. Right? Let is good practice. No let is not good practice. Because global variables are difficult. And they run into problems. Okay? Things should always be used in the scope, like, things should always be declared in the scope they apply to.
That's why global variable is not.
It's kind of a deep philosophical question, but I'll do my best. So I'll show you with an example. I'm going to make a new JavaScript file, link it to the same page, call it globals. There we go. So x in the global scope, give it 5. We declare x in the local scope, give it 10. The function simply prints the value of x, and then we run the function. Maybe even make it a little bit more fancy. There we go. So it won't let you redefine x, right? So in C# and in JavaScript you would be able to do this, but here it won't let you redefine the value of x. So let's instead say something like x plus plus, call f, a bunch of times. I took that out. Save. Oh, did I declare it here? I did declare it here. All right. So there's another thing for you. Here's another little error that we ran across. The x that was complaining about already existing wasn't even declared in the same file. It was declared in this file. All JavaScript files share one interpreter session. So it is not correct to think of each of these different JavaScript files as being different programs. They are files that constitute one program between them. So they will step on each other's toes. They will interfere with each other's variables. In some sense, it's easier to just keep everything in one file. It avoids this class of errors. Yeah, what a mess JavaScript is. So anyway, we should be able to run this now. So every time we run the function, it prints out x. X increases once each time, right? This is something that might even be useful. Count how many times a function is called, something like that, right? The problem becomes when other things are modifying it too, right? So let's say, just for example, function g x plus equals 5, and it doesn't report anything. And let's sneak a few calls to g in here. You can see we get pretty hefty jumps in what we thought was the number of times we've called the f function, right? So here's the basic problem. And I know this is kind of an abstract problem, but bear with me, all right? When we declare a variable, we declare it for a purpose, right? A variable is correctly used if it has the same purpose everywhere it's used, right? When you have a bunch of different functions, it's not necessarily the case that the same person wrote each function. different people might have different ideas about what that variable is for, right? So that's why you don't want to share variables with people, right? Even yourself. I often in class use the example of you're programming on a team with someone who's not very good at programming. Well, unfortunately, you are programming on a team with someone who's not very good at programming when you're working by yourself, right? Because you, from 3 weeks ago, won't remember what you meant by that variable. This is why commenting is so important. What is the purpose of the variable? Document it. Document it so that you can read it later, because you yourself will forget. It doesn't matter how good your memory is, you will forget your code, right? So it rubs against that principle. Overuse of global variables, unless it's done carefully, can easily lead to unexpected results. Even if you're being careful, it can lead to unexpected results. So that's one. Another one is we have a design principle with functions that a function should always, always, always return the same output for the same inputs. Right? That makes sense. That's a principle that makes sense. When you use global variables, you are not doing that. Right? With f, I am getting a different result every time I call it, but the inputs haven't changed. Right? Because it takes no input. The better way to do it is to use the inputs to the function, right? So if we say, for example, take some value q plus plus, log q, right? And then return q. And then provide x. Well, it's a little more complicated than that. You actually have to reassign. So the line becomes this, right? So even though the output is still the same, from a coding perspective, if I call function f with value 10, I will always get the same result out of it, right? The decision to use it as a counter, that's a decision that's being made outside of the function. The function itself has become simple, right? And simpler functions are better. Does that make sense?
There is no argument in function g. In line 17, you used x.
Yes. So ideally, I would change g as well to reflect these changes. I would do something like, q, and then return q plus 5, right? Realistically, this isn't what you would use functions for, right? But we can now, we can reason much more easily about what these two functions actually do now, right? Function f is just a function that increments the input and prints it. Function g just returns, 5 plus whatever the input is, right? So that always behaves the same, no matter, so long as the inputs are the same, it will always produce the same output. The same is now true of f. That wasn't the case before, right? So those functions have become much easier to reason about, right? Another way of stating this is that these functions no longer have side effects. You want to program in such a way that you don't have side effects, unless you have to, right? You try to minimize the side effects. You can't get rid of them completely, to some extent. You can think of the web page itself as the side effect, right? But the more we stick to this type of programming style, the easier it will be to build large systems. And that's why global variables, I won't tell you to never use them, but I will discourage you from using them when possible, because, overusing globals is bad practice because it makes your code much more difficult to write about and reason about. Consider this. In our new version, very easy to document those functions, right? Function which increments input, prints, and returns, right? Adds 5 to input and returns. Now imagine trying to write the same comments about the older version, right? With the older version, it was something like uses global variable x to keep track of number of calls to the function, right? And then the problem is, basically, to get a clear picture of what x is actually doing, you have to cross-reference every function that's touching x and see what they're all doing and understand all those interacting behaviors, right? Here, we have separated out the behavior of x from the behavior of the functions. They can be reasoned about separately. We can look at this series of things and know exactly what's going on, right? And if we need to change it, we can easily. Same thing with these guys, right? Am I making sense? Have I hit this point enough? Can we move on? Okay, question? Yours not working. Save your files.
Mine is not working.
Save Hello World as well.
Oh.
Yeah, that's the thing about now that we're working with a large number of files.
It has to be saved on.
Control KS is supposedly save all, so let me try that. Control KS. Oh. Control KS. Yeah, oh yeah, I was holding. Okay. So you'll see this in some editors and command line environments sometimes. Something like Control C or Control K or something will be command, and then you press another button for a secondary command. That's what the purpose of Control K is. Obviously, you wouldn't map that up to Control C, because what's Control C?
It's off.
Yes. So,
Turn on auto save.
sorry?
What if you turn on auto save?
Yeah, you can do that too. Yeah. There are a couple of ways around it, but yeah. Yeah, actually, it's 11. So, class shall resume at 11:50. 20-minute break. I hereby declare. Sound good? Good. All right. There we go.
So this is your longest class, Dr. Moore, or there's another one that is more than this?
This actually has the record for me. This is the longest class I've ever taught.
Oh, wow.
I've done 3-hour classes occasionally before, but never 4. That's a long time.
The reason behind probably because of the topic itself is like more detail and has more weight.
Yeah, but it's kind of contrary to good pedagogy. Like, what's better, like if you're going to do 5 hours of class a week on the subject, it would be much better to have it an hour each day at a consistent time of day. Because, you know, basically, people are normally like tuned out by 20 minutes in. So, you know, in theory, I guess that means we should be doing more shorter breaks rather than, you know, one big one in the middle.
Yeah.
But it's also like close enough to lunch that like, I want people to be able to get food and like go to the washroom if they need to, you know? So,
Or maybe they split it like it's kind of 5 hours in a week. So if they split it in like 2 days, one day would be 3 hours and another day would be 2 hours, that would make much more sense in terms of, yeah, it's not bad, it's more interesting.
I'm finding it more tolerable than I thought it would be at the beginning of the semester.
Yeah.
But, yeah, it's just, you know.
And it's interesting, it's not boring like, you know, networking and the operating system.
It's a pretty decently put together course so far, I have to say.
I see it, it's more structured.
Yeah. Well, that's Kevin for you. I hope that you will, at some point, have the opportunity to be instructed by him directly, because he's quite good. So, where were we?
How was your exam?
Workout?
Yeah. You just sent an email. You just sent an email once it managed.
Oh, to all of us?
Yeah. And you put it as an announcement.
I didn't check. Alright.
Anything important for me? No? Okay, good. Because, you know.
Yeah, I know.
So, let's talk about arrays. So, JavaScript arrays are dynamic data structures, so they're not like arrays in the proper sense as you would see them in C#, at least not in the back end, but they function more or less the same. So, arrays are objects, they hold multiple types, and they are 0 indexed by default. So, for example, if I have an array, I can put doubles, integers, strings, anything I like, in any order I like.
As compared to the C#, we would only put one, because we were declared as an string and boolean. But in this case, we have X can be anything, it can be string, it can be boolean, it can be integer, okay.
including object references. You saw a couple of times I did that thing where I pulled all the references to like all the links or all the paragraphs. So those are object references that you can create an array with too. It doesn't just have to be primitive types. So, as with C, Java, C#, etc., you access a particular element of the array using square brace notation. Same as last time. Good. Elements not yet defined will return the special value undefined. So, undefined is perhaps deserves a little bit of attention at this point. So, in this, we have our G function, which has been defined, right? If we, and this is another reason to do things the way we did them. If you provide a value, you get the same value back. But what if you don't provide a value? It provides a special value called not a number. So I don't know if you want to call them error types or error literals, but that's basically how they function. There are three of them that you have to be concerned about in JavaScript. Number one, undefined. Number two, null. Number three, not a number. So, for example, when I call G without providing an argument, it still performs the calculation inside of G. It still runs G, even though in C# that would be an error, right? That would be undersupplied argument error. It would terminate execution. Here, it doesn't undersupply the argument. It replaces any missing arguments with the undefined value. This argument has been undefined, or this has not been defined. Does that make sense? Now, once we are inside of that function, let's just pull up the function itself. We then have undefined plus 5. Not a number is a value that's produced when you try to perform numeric operations on non-numeric things. So, for example, if I try to add 10 to an undefined, it's not a number. If I try to add 10 to a null type, it gives 10. So, null behaves a bit differently from undefined. It's yeah, it's taking it to be 0. Exactly. So, unfortunately, it's just the sort of thing where you must be aware that these three exist. The exact nature of how they interact with each other is not necessarily clear. Null plus null is 0, you know. Null plus not a number is still not a number. Basically, anything plus not a number is not a number. Like if you perform any numeric calculation on a man, then you get a man back out again. That's yes. So the undefined value is actually used for things. It's not just like some stupid thing, right? So now, let's introduce a slightly more complicated data structure. I'm assuming that you guys, are reasonably okay with arrays from last time. Good enough to know what they are and what they do, right? We now come to JavaScript objects. So, the way that objects work in JavaScript is very different from the way that objects work in C#. It's a lot more dynamic and strange to work with. Here's how we do it, right? First, you should know what the term JSON means. Yes. So, JavaScript object notation is a string form of an object. A lot of the time, when you receive data from the server, that data takes the form of a JSON object, or a JSON formatted string, right? So, it's correct to think of JSON as a type of file, rather than as a artifact of the program itself. A JSON object, like a JSON file, needs to be decoded in order to be used in JavaScript. It is a very common format for exchanging data on the web. When you load an Instagram post, the information is being transmitted via JSON. Many things are transmitted via JSON. Here's a reference for you. There you go. So, let's take a look at an example. This is JSON, right? Arrays use square braces. Objects use curly braces. Pardon me. So, what an object is in JavaScript is an association between keys and values. We call these key-value pairs. The first one's always a string. In object-oriented land, we consider these the attributes or the class variables. They then have particular values. The value might be a string, it might be a number, it might be a list, it might be another object. This is a means of organizing and classifying data. So, in this example, I have an employees variable. If I access list at 0 at first name, I get John, right? Employees dot list at 0 dot first name. That's how you get information out of the JSON.
This is how you decode.
This is different from the decoding process, actually. If I were to take this as a string, this whole thing is a string. Except it's got wrong types of code characters. Let's make a new one. it's a long line, but I'll zoom it out and then I'll zoom it back in again. To make this a valid string in JavaScript, I had to put it all on one line. Another important point about JavaScript is the quotes. There's no longer a difference between them. So double quotes and single quotes can be used interchangeably. Because this example contains a lot of double quotes, I wrapped the whole thing in single quotes on the outside, and that works to call it all a string. Right? So var JSON data is equal to that. Save that up. Reload. JSON data. You can see it's this big string. Right? It's been loaded as a string. This is how this information will come to you through files, through HTTP packets. So when the server sends you JSON information, this is how it's coming, as a string, as a series of characters. Does that make sense? No?
Yeah, what does that mean? 5 is always 5, which is.
Oh no, this is just a particular piece of JSON. I got another incorrect quote. No, I can change this to 170 or whatever I like.
What is 5 being stored? Or I don't know.
Sorry. Why was 5 in there to begin with?
Why their number? What does that mean?
Oh, it just means that the value of the some other property attribute is 5. You should think of these as variables. Some prop, some other prop. You should think of these as variables. Once we get the object out of these, we will be able to work with them as if they were real variables. But right now it's just in a string. It's encoded in a string. So this is what's meant by JSON decoding, right? So if you type the word JSON dot, you get two very, very important methods. One is parse and the other is stringify. Let me just make sure I'm recording. Am I recording? Yeah, I'm recording. Parse takes the JSON string and produces an object from it. Stringify takes an object and produces the string from it. So if I parse my JSON data, save, reload, JSON data is still a string. The value of the data variable, you can see that's not a string anymore, right?
It has 3 something.
Right? What we can now do is access these properties using dot syntax. So dot some property gives you some value. That's not possible with JSON data because it's just a string. Even if I spell it correctly, it's still undefined. Right? This is just a string. You have to decode it, and then it becomes workable data. this will become an essential operation. In order to take data inside of the web page and send it to the server, there are a few methods of doing this, but one of them is to take that data, convert it to a string, and then fire it off. So, for example, and just to complete the loop, let's say data dot some other property is equal to 5 again, and then var JSON data 2 is equal to data dot or JSON dot stringify data. Then JSON 2 data 2, you'll see that the property has been altered, but that this is still encoded as a string. This will hopefully become more clear as we do some examples later on in the course. But basically, lists are an element in here that you can access, right? You can even put additional objects in here. So, for example, if I had, drink coffee food is or drink and sandwich. Sandwich might lead to another object array, or object, pardon me, with things like bread equals multigrain, right? Meat equals none. Cheese equals cheddar, etc. Right? So then we could say, if this was var s, we could say s dot sandwich dot cheese, and the interpreter would say cheddar. Does that make sense? A little bit? So the idea is,
certain thing from the list that's listed.
yeah,
Basically, there's a, sorry, I'm interrupting. So there is a list of items within the list,
Mhm.
and you can basically call from that list by doing this.
yes.
Yes.
The correct terminology is to think of these as key value pairs.
Here.
So these are the keys, right? These are keys. This is a value, and this is the value of this key, even though it contains more keys, right? So yeah, you can think of it as a list of pairings, right? Now, it just so happens, if you load this up, those pairings look a lot like variables, and you can manipulate them like variables. You can assign to them. So if you wanted to say like s.drink is equal to milk, right? Activate that, and that's what happens, right? You can store data in these things. Does this make sense? Somewhat? Good. Again, we start getting into this a lot more heavily once the server and the client start talking to each other, which isn't for a bit yet. Here's a few things. We can also use window and prompt in addition to alert boxes to do some basic I/O. I decided to do this up front to do a hello world, but here it is. Here's the slide on it. So let's try out window and prompt.
Dr. Moore, I have a question. So any string, words, it's always in a double quotation mark, right? Similar to C#.
No, not in JavaScript.
No?
In JavaScript, double quotes and single quotes can be used interchangeably, but the convention is to use double quotes in a context like this. So
If we don't use any, so it will give us a compiler error, similar to.
if you don't use any quotes,
Yeah.
yes, yeah. Well, if it's in a string, it will. But if it's not in a string, then I think it would be fine, actually. So let me explain the purpose of the quotes. So let's say that you wanted to do, Fred likes ham, right? As a string. You want to include the quote characters in the string. You have two options, right? Fred likes ham, right? This is called escaping the character, putting the slide. Okay.
I had the code screenshot,
I think we're back.
I did all of it.
Okay. Sorry about that.
No worries.
So, where was I? Oh yes, Fred likes ham. So, this is option number one. This is the only option you can have in C#. C#. It's not how you write C#. In JavaScript, you can still do this, but you can also use single quotes instead.
And it will work fine.
It will work fine. You can also do it the other way around. That also works. Basically, if you use one type, you don't have to escape the other type. And that's a feature of languages which support both quotation marks. There's a class of them. That class includes Python and PHP to an extent. PHP gets a little weird though. Does this make sense? So that's what's going on with that example. So, any other questions about JSON before we move on? Okay.
So I can code this, JavaScript object in script tag, right?
Yes, there are two ways of going about it. So if you do it like a string like this, I'm basically trying to simulate how that data comes from somewhere else. It will come from somewhere else as a string like that. But if you would rather enter that data directly here, var data 2 is equal to, you just do it. Drink is coffee. Sandwich has bread, cheese,
Is this a curly bracket or is this a
Yep.
square?
These are curly brackets. Bread is cheese, meat is cheese, and cheese is the same. So the property labels, property names, do not need to appear in quotes. I think it's optionally they can though. Let's see if this complains. Yeah, optionally they can appear in quotes, but they don't have to. It's another one of these like, you do you, man. Do it whichever way works for you, man. As long as you're consistent. However, the quotes are actually absolutely required on that side, because otherwise that's a reference to a copy variable that doesn't exist, right? If you want that to be a string on this side, it must be a string, right? So if we reload that, data 2 dot sandwich dot meat is cheese. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that's the other way of going about it. That's like this is the way you would do it in pure JavaScript if you were only using it for JavaScript. But of course, you can also stringify this. That's the string. Oh, another quick note about JavaScript. The semicolon at the end of the line is technically optional.
Oh, that's great. Oh, that's.
But now nothing terminates the line, though.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
So yeah, I will still use them though. But yeah, if you take away the semicolon, it works fine too. I know I'm going to have difficulty convincing you that this is a terrible language, but trust me. Just trust me, it's terrible. You'll find out. You will see. Actually, I did forget one. There we go. So let's try window. See what window does. Window. This is a window. No. Is it capitalized or something? So window doesn't seem to work. I think Kevin's information might be old. But prompt does. So you remember perhaps, well actually I don't think we ever actually did this in C#, where you like put something in the console and then you have to type something back in and talk to it. Well, this is how you do that in JavaScript. You can prompt the user for something. This is a prompt. Okay, what do you expect of me? And then the return value of the prompt is whatever the user entered, as a string, of course. So it's like 5 plus prompt or, you know, what's your favorite color? Now it's neon. Right? What's your favorite color? Blue. Now it's neon blue. Right? The return value of the prompt function is whatever the user enters. We can then use that in further calculations to do other things, like correct what their favorite color is. Does this make sense? Sort of? See, this is the point where it would have been useful for you guys to have studied like Python or something, because this is literally the entirety of how you interact with programs when you do like a Python course. But so it goes. Any questions about that?
I don't understand the second one. I understand the prompt, how it works, but why, what is, like now it's neon? Like,
Okay,
can
let me
explain
show you.
that?
So,
Enter something.
right, enter something, okay. The value that is entered gets stored in the variable, right? And now, all I'm doing is saying alert something, something, plus whatever was entered.
Oh, something, okay, got it.
Does that make sense?
Now,
I'm just doing it all on one line in that example. It's a little bit more dramatic, you know. Any questions? Good. Keep in mind that this will always come back as a string, right? So, if you wanted to do something like prompt, enter a number, enter number 6, and I said, you know, Q plus 8, it's concatenated, right? So, the question then becomes, well, okay, you've alluded to this problem where it treats strings as numbers a couple of times. How do I get it to treat that as an actual number? Number.parse. You get to choose whether to parse it as a float or an int. But that will return the number value rather than the string value. JavaScript does not consider itself to have integer and floating point types. It considers itself to have one numeric type called number. So you might remember towards the end of C#, we would do, integer dot toString or something like that. There's no integer class, there's no double class, there's no float class. There is a number class. Yes. And it's got a lot of different things. For example, not a number is an element of the number class, which leads to one of my favorite JavaScript jokes. Is number, or number dot is, how is it? Getting it now. I have to look it up. Unfortunately. Ah! So here's a slightly less good, but still equivalent joke. Type of not a number is number. Obvious contradiction. If it's not a number, how can it be a number? That's another thing you can use to determine what the types of things are in JavaScript. There is a type of function that returns as a string what the type of the thing is. So, if you wanted to check, for example, to see if the user actually did input a number, let's put that in here. So var q is equal to prompt, enter a number. If number is integer q, alert plus number dot parse int q, else alert. That's not a number at all, though it might be a So if I run this, enter a number, 9. Oh, really? Come on. It's quite clearly an integer. Sometimes things in JavaScript randomly don't work. I don't know why, and the only thing I can do is move on, unfortunately. It's that type of a language. Although it makes me sad every time it happens. Anyway, so, moving along. Control structures. All of our standard C syntax control structures are present in JavaScript. C popularized while loops, for loops, and other control structures found in languages like C# today. C is the granddaddy of all modern programming languages. So, in terms of decision statements, we have if statements, we have if else cases, right? We also have switch statements. For loops, we have while loops, do while loops, and for loops. A bit later on, we will also be talking about for each loops. They are convenient in certain circumstances, but generally speaking, anything a for each loop can do can be done by something else. So I kind of want to keep the set of things we study small because we have so much to get through, But all of our old friends from C# return to us in JavaScript in this manner. It's like once you drill down deep enough, you're not going to be able to tell the difference between C# and JavaScript at this level. Overall, the structure is definitely JavaScript, but if you're writing a line of code, that one line of code might be exactly the same as it, or with very minor alterations, versus something from C#. Good. Functions. We can define functions in JavaScript with the function keyword. This is a bit different than in C#. In C#, we were all about the context, right? We were all about what class is this being declared in? Is the object going to have this method? We're not really so much concerned about functions having, functions being attached to objects in JavaScript. It's just not a thing that comes up as much, at least at this level. The way that you attach a function to a class in JavaScript is by making one of the values a function, like function reference. So when we create function my function becomes a reference to this function. Functions do not need to return values, and we can pass functions as arguments to other functions. This comes up quite a bit, actually. So much of the time, when we set events, we give that event a function to be run when that event is triggered, right? So in this example, we have the set timeout function. The set timeout function just sets a one-time timer, right? Wait 1 second, then call this function. When this is an event, and when the event is triggered, this function will be executed.
And the function is basically A, B, C.
A plus B plus C, yeah. Now the question is, we're not providing any arguments here, right? Which is something that we might consider doing, but that's okay. It's kind of non-trivial to figure out how to pass, and I'm revealing my naivety to the internet when I say this, but for the beginner, figuring out how to pass how to pass information into a function without calling it is kind of tricky, but that's okay. So, for example, let's get rid of all this. And maybe get rid of this guy as well. He's annoying. Function. Do something. Our function foo. Alert. Something happened. Set timeout. Foo. In theory, this line of code sets foo to be executed in 3 seconds after the JavaScript, after that line of JavaScript code is executed. So let's see how it works. Uh-oh, we got it immediately. So the problem is, if you put the round braces after a function, you are calling the function.
Right away.
You're calling it right away, exactly. If you want to reference a function, you do not provide those round braces. Save. Now, there it goes. I'll do that again in case you weren't paying attention.
Yep.
I reload the page.
Yep.
1, 2, 3. Something happened. There we go.
Got it.
Cool. Doing good? Wonderful.
So,
Question?
no, I just want to see.
So, functions can be passed into other functions. Functions can also be the return values of other functions. That we won't see as much, but this gets used all the time in embedded systems. Speaking of embedded systems, so one of the most important things we do with JavaScript is set up event handlers. Up to now, pretty much all of the JavaScript that we've written, we've just been playing with the language, right? We haven't been writing a page and like designing the page for interaction. Designing the page for interaction is the whole point of JavaScript. Up to now, all we've been doing is language examples. So, event handlers respond to events taking place. We can add event handlers to HTML elements. So it's really quite simple to use. You pick you pick an attribute tag corresponding to the type of event you wish to set up, and then you specify the function that you'd like to have executed. Common ones include onChange, onClick, on mouse over, on mouse out, on key down, on load. So, let's have a little fun. So, let's make, for example, a div width is 300 pixels, height is 300 pixels. On click, or no, on mouse over, let's run a function called turn green. On mouse leave, run a function called turn red. So let's make a new events.javascript file. There we go. And I will split left right so that you guys can keep an eye on that. So we want two functions, turn red and turn green. Let me just check to make sure this works. Yeah, fine. While we're at it, let's get the border. 2 pixels, solid black. There we go. So we also need a way to grab a reference to the div. So let's say ID is the div. Let div equal document dot query selector the div. I'm going to decrease the font size. There we go. That's a bit better. Div.
Why is sharp necessary?
The sharp is necessary because we're targeting an ID. Remember with CSS attributes, the sharp meant ID, the dot meant class, and then with nothing it just meant the HTML tag itself, right? Query selector will select the first hit that it encounters in the HTML page. Query selector all will create a list of all matches. Since this is an ID, it's only ever going to return one anyways. So there you have it. Does that make sense? So save, save, save. Really? Still not working, right? See, this is why we have a console. So, documents, Forgot to save the HTML, gets me every time. I'm no longer getting an error. Aha. Here's another frustrating thing about JavaScript. So, you may have thought everything looked good. I'm getting no errors, but I'm still not getting what I want. Here's the problem. Right there. The expected property name has a capital C. And you may say to yourself, well, in C# I certainly would have gotten an error about that, having misspelled that. Well, not in a dynamic language, my friend. If we reload, now we get the expected behavior. So, here's what it does. If you misspell an attribute name, it will use it anyways. The div element has now two div.style.background color. It now has both. One of them maps to the web page and tells the web page how to style it. The other is useless and a red herring, so to speak, and does nothing and is a trap. That's a trap. This one's a trap. This is the one you want. So simply misspelling an attribute name is not something that you can catch with a compiler error. You have to observe the behavior of the website to see that it went wrong, which is annoying and frustrating and just a pain. Does this make sense? The script, yes. So this is the manner in which JavaScript actually gets introduced. Most of the time, anyway. Some of the time, you will have JavaScript doing stuff on its own, but most of the time, it will be some kind of consequence of user interaction. Right? It's like, consider the Windows forms, right? If the user didn't actually click anything on the Windows form, it doesn't do much, right? The same thing is usually true of websites, right? Sure, you might have a carousel that's like flipping through a couple of different images, right? You know, you might be receiving periodic updates, right? I showed you guys the tic-tac-toe game example, right? Yeah, like that one gets periodic updates, but in general, most of the time, this is how you get functions integrated into your HTML code. Does this make sense? Did you guys manage to get this working? Not yet? This is pretty important, so we should stick on this point until everybody's managed to accomplish this. just get rid of that one for now. Capital C's. To demonstrate the point that they're different. This is the one that the browser expects. This is a mistake that we made. So now that that's fixed, it works. Good. Oh, you're getting an error. Oh, copy and paste that line into that function. Right? It's
The first one is,
the first one. Because you defined it with a let, it's local to that function, right? And not global to all of them.
Oh.
I have one question. There's style attribute is CSS style.
Yes.
Then it is not necessary the semicolon at the very far end to end
Which setting
value. I mean the next height 300 px in index HTML.
Oh, here?
Yeah. and the-
Oh, well, yes,
very
actually,
last
technically, it
part.
should still be there because this is still a string. It's just a string that contains a new line and a bunch of spaces. But it's going to, it would complain if that were
I mean
missing.
the very last part after 300
Oh, here?
px, yes.
Yeah, the last one is
It's not
optional.
necessary, actually.
The last one is optional. It's only the ones that are in between that are like required. But yeah, that will work too. That works too. Cool. So, please.
In CSS, I mean the CSS style and JavaScript, I think it's both have a similar functions, like change the background colors, things like that. Then which one is preferred to use?
So, it depends on how much you're doing, right? You can do, like that little example that we just did, you can do in CSS entirely, and it's probably preferable to do so. In general, styling should be in the CSS file in general, but it's very handy for demonstrating properties. You know, demonstrating,
JavaScript?
yeah, for JavaScript. Like, you know, flashing a square from green to red and back again, it's a very like in your face visual thing, you know, which is why I did it that way. But I could have changed any number of properties that way. You know, for example, Yes. No. Right? No.
What about semicolon? Semicolon next to no and yes.
Not required in JavaScript. But no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, right? You can modify any property of the object this way. Here's another example. Let's say we had an image. Source is equal to happy, well, I should go get the images first. It's like I want them to like be mad when I click on it. That's terrifying. That's better. Somewhat. Not really. That's okay. How about this one?
Got it.
You got it? Awesome.
So Dr. Moore, you even like use the diff with the let. I use it as well, but in the second function you didn't use the let statement. So why I was like having an error and you are not?
Look very carefully at the placement of my let. Is it inside a function?
Outside the function. Oh, got it. Okay, got it. So basically yours were global to both of the function and mine was local to one of the function, that's why. Got it? Perfect.
So you can see there are quite a lot of events, right? On click, on context menu, on double click, drag, drag in, drag enter leave, start, stop, duration change. Like I don't know what a lot of these even do. On mouse down, sure. Make angry. On mouse up. Make happy. Give this ID face. Let face equal documents dot query selector face function make angry face dot source is equal to happy or what was it? It was angry dot gif. I think it's gif. It says it's JPEG, but let me view my file extensions. It's a GIF. Always view this in file extensions. Always know what it is. Function. That is the type of error people can spend hours on. Why isn't my image loading? Why isn't my image loading? It's because you aren't actually using the real file name. You know? Make happy. I think was the other one. index.source is equal to happy.png. Now, reload. Right? When I hold it, he's angry. When I release, it goes back.
What is the trigger? Mouse up and down?
Yes. Now so.
Drag up, drag down?
Up and down means button presses, basically.
Oh.
Yeah, so down is like you have depressed the click key, and then up is you have released the click key. It's basically borrowing terminology from the keyboard. So, yeah. And all of this is just, all of this is fancy, like do this, do that, flop between two states stuff, but you can just run a function that like, when somebody clicks or double clicks, and it's just a thing, So yeah, that's the event system. Any questions? I know we're covering quite a lot today. I know. If we also have another hour this week to cover stuff, or recover stuff, or go back over stuff. Fortunately, the rest of the slides are all stuff that I've already talked about, so I'm just going to do the slides somewhat more formally, okay? But you had a question?
Yes, so why we use the sharp
Yes.
for referencing?
So, you remember in CSS style rules, the way that we got to an ID was by using the sharp symbol and then the ID. Classes used a period, and then elements had nothing. The query selector function selects things out of the document the same way that CSS does, using the exact same queries. So, overall conceptual point now. No code associated with this one. The document object model, or the DOM. So, in an HTML page, the whole thing is considered one object with various sub-properties, right? At the top level, we have the keyword document. Under that, all of our HTML tags are sub-objects. So our document is modeled as an object. Document, object, model. Right? So in theory, it's possible to do stuff like document.html or document.head dot meta, or title. There we go. Document.head.title. Is that what it is? HTML. Yes. Title. Dot. Is equal to. Basically, there are arcane ways of going down through the top and accessing all of the individual elements. But once you've got access to documents, the reason that we use query selector and other similar methods to search is because it just gives us, like, it's a search function over this tree, right? If I want this H1 element, it's a lot more work for me, the programmer, to say, okay, document HTML body heading 1, as opposed to just saying, give me heading 1. And that's what query selector is doing, right? But all of these elements, right, the attributes of them are properties of the object. Attributes, class variables, right? So if I have a link, the text and the attribute href are both properties of the link element. The link element is a sub-object of the thing that contains it, which in this case is body. Does that make sense? So a certain amount of working with HTML is understanding when things are inside of each other and calling specific methods in order to add things in the right places. You can actually create HTML elements in JavaScript from nothing. Here's an example. So let's say let's pick the document dot and create element. You then select the element type. So image in this case. This creates that creates an object in JavaScript, but it does not attach it to the web page. To attach it to the web page, you need a point of insertion, right? So, we have a reference to a div up here, so let's use it. Div dot append child pick. So tree structures, the naming convention for it is parent, children, right? So body is the parent, A and H1 are the children in that case. When we append child, what does append mean? Yes, we add to the end of. So to the end of the list of child nodes, we add an additional node, the one that we just created. So that's what that does. We still have to give the pick some attribute though to make it show up at least. So pick dot source is equal to happy.png, just to borrow something we already have, right? And there it is. It gets blown out as soon as this occurs, but there it is. Right? So I put that there, not using HTML, but using JavaScript. It's kind of silly to do this by default on loading the JavaScript. You might as well do it in the HTML. But having it this way means we can make it dynamic, which means we could do something like make it a function, create happiness, because I think the class could use some happiness right now. R. And then, you know what? Let's add a button. Oh, and that's outside my body. What am I doing? My goodness. Let's make a button. on click is create happiness. Text is make happy. There we go. And now I click the button and the happy face appears. Right? And this isn't something I've shown you yet, but the Elements tab shows you what the structure of the currently displayed HTML is, even after modifications by JavaScript. So this is what is being displayed. So initially, inside the body, you see we have a div with nothing in it. We click this button. You see that little thing that popped up? Image source happy.png gets inserted into the DOM. Does that make sense?
But the real, original index.html file doesn't change.
Correct. Yeah. The original index.html cannot be changed by any modification that's occurring in the browser. Remember, at the moment, these are files on our computer, but in the final version, those are files on a server, right? You do not ever take any modifications to your code that's made by an end user and integrate that into your server. Because what do we never do with clients? We never trust the client, right? If we were to allow some rando on the internet to make modifications to our code base, it's like,
You're basically allowing them to hack your
yeah,
page.
it's like you're not even allowing them. You are making a landing strip for their helicopter. You know, you're making them like a landing pad for their UFO. That's like you are rolling the red carpet out for them, basically. You're making it too easy. So yeah, these modifications, and that's part of the other reason that JavaScript is interesting. Is like these are all client-side changes, right? JavaScript is the client-side language. We can do similar things using the server. It is possible to insert one picture or another into a box based on values in the server. That's how like Instagram works, right? Instagram is basically putting one or another picture in a box based on settings, right? Fundamentally reduced, that's what the operation is. But to do that on the server means you have to know ahead of time what you're doing, right? The server cannot react to button presses in a client directly, right? The button press in a client may send an additional request packet to the server. The server responds to the request packet, and then the client does something with that, right? But the server is not magically aware that this button gets pressed, right? Unless this button actually sends a packet, the server doesn't know or care, right? So to add that dynamic element of user interaction, JavaScript. That's why JavaScript. Does that make sense? Yeah. Hopefully. So I've kind of already talked about these. I've done these several times as well. I know class is just about over. JavaScript can access and change the DOM, as I just demonstrated. Yes, CSS styles as well, and we can create new elements and attributes. The way that you get stuff out, query selector please, or query selector are all, please do not use get element by ID. It is the old fuddy-duddy way of doing things. With, profound apologies to Kevin, but you're a fuddy-duddy Kevin. At least you are according to Steve. So, not that Steve, the other Steve. We have a professor in the department named Steve.
Professor Moore, I saw Steve the other day. I think he's taking another course.
Oh, good, I'm glad. Yeah.
I saw him, but didn't interact. Probably he's doing another course.
But he's probably doing better because he's doing something more closely aligned with his interests.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah. Yep, and you can modify things, which is again something we've done throughout this entire lesson. So, any questions? All right. Good. We shall resume on Friday.
Yep.
We will do an hour of let's actually try some stuff now. But that is the lesson content. Hopefully Phil is feeling better.
And Dr. Mo, would you upload the code on?
Of course.
And video as well?
Yeah, the video as well, yeah. Even though it's split across 2 memory cards,